Howdy everyone! For today's Jolly Lark, we're going to talk about why you might want to apply your next pre-shading layer, sometimes called a zenithal shade, where you're putting a lighter color down from above, why you might want to apply it with a dry brush, and why you might want to put that on top of a nice neutral blue, like this Vallejo Ultramarine Blue Primer. So with this as a base coat, what we're then going to do is take some of the Pro Acryl Bright Neutral Gray. Some of the Pro Acryl Bright Warm Gray, because the blue's kind of a cool color. I'm going to get a nice fat rounded tip brush, get it nice and dry, test it on your hand a little bit, make sure it's looking all right. And then using brush strokes coming down from above, we're just going to build up some of these warm gray highlights. If you're getting a little bit of streakiness right there, I always start at the top. If you're getting a little bit of streakiness, it probably means you have too much paint on your brush. But just wipe it off on your paper towel a little more. And with every brush stroke, I'm coming down. So if you kind of see, I'm coming down. I'm not hitting the miniature on my way back up. Every brush stroke is coming down. And once you get the hang of this, you'll be able to do this pretty rapidly, kind of get the rhythm of down, pull it back a little bit. So I'm not swishing it back and forth. It's every single motion of the brush is going down. The goal here is to use the lighter gray paint to simulate the sunlight that's shining down on this model from above. What this is doing is prepping the miniature to have thin, translucent contrast paints put on top of it. Often this is done by spraying the model either with a spray can or an airbrush directly from above or a slight angle. But a spray pre-shade, it fills in more of the gaps and details than you're going to get with a dry brush. By using a big fat dry brush and downstroking the bright gray onto the model, you're preserving a lot of the details that a spray zenithal pre-shade might otherwise cover up. It's a different effect, and you have to play around with it, see what you think. You can see like this leather strap here is a great example. If we blasted this model straight down with an airbrush, you don't think you would get quite as much texture and detail as you do with dry brushing. But whatever suits your fancy. This is also, if you're watching this video and you have seen lots about zenithal highlighting online but don't have an airbrush, you can watch any video that uses a zenithal highlight step, and you can use a dry brush just like this, a downwards dry brush, to achieve a very, very, very similar effect. And so you can see already, when you look at this miniature from above, it's largely filled in with a fair amount of gray. And you look at the same part of the miniature from below, and it's mostly blue there. Now, some parts of the miniature may not be quite as amenable to just brushing down. This horizontal surface here of the crossbow, this one, you're going to need to go over across the miniature. That helps get some of those horizontal surfaces light on top like the rest of it. That blue is going to serve a really important purpose later on once we start putting more colors on the miniature and serve as a natural shade color to all the colors that go on top. With again, the same goal of lightening the top of the miniature where light would be coming down and hitting it while leaving the dark largely undry brushed. Can even go so far, I think the top of his hood, I want to be pretty much all light gray. So you can come in and dab a little extra light gray. Similarly, the goal on the top here, put a little extra wet brush of light gray on top here at the very brightest parts of the miniature, and then kind of feather it down a little bit. Keep in mind I'm going slow because I want to show you how to do it and show you the steps with enough detail that you can repeat it, but this is a pretty fast process. If I wasn't recording this and just doing it for myself, this probably takes about a minute a miniature. It's quick. I do want this to be darker than the upper parts of the miniature, so I'm going to go pretty lightly, just catch some edges. This part of the miniature is going to end up being largely shadowed when it's finished, so I'm going easy, but I do want to pick up some of those edges and get some of those gray tones in there. Same thing, edge of the crossbow. If you know ahead of time what parts are going to be metal, you can kind of ignore those because those are going to get a metal treatment later. Just go over all of this and kind of lighten up the face area a little bit. Just kind of be aware of what your brush is blocking. So don't be afraid to follow along with any painting tutorial video from me or other great painters on YouTube, even if you don't have an airbrush, because you can achieve a very, very similar effect that you'd get from a zenithal spray with a nice big fat brush. Even go in a little bit underneath just to get a little hint of detail there. As a next step, you can totally leave it here, but as a next step, I'm going to grab some pure, bold titanium white. This is a really nice bright white that Pro Acryl makes. This is going to be a super, super light dry brush. With this, I'm really want to make sure I'm not getting any streakiness. You test on your hand to make sure it's picking up your knuckle texture, like that. And this is just tips and edges. I'm going a little bit slow for the camera here. If I was not doing this just for my own project and not recording it, this, is probably 15 seconds of just real quick tops of things. You're really just wanting to hit the tops of surfaces, edges and corners of things. Again, downward strokes. And you can kind of see that that's just brightening up the edges. And then the main thing that the reason I do this step is some of those spots like the top of his cloak where I painted it in pretty solidly with the gray earlier. This is giving us a little bit of definition up there that we wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't love the texture of dry brushed paint when it's the final step, but I think it works great as a kind of a place setting to put some contrast paints on top of down the road. So tops and edges of white, a little bit on the base, always downward strokes. And we're ready to let this fully dry so you don't smear any of that white and gray around, and then we're ready to hit it with some contrast paints. Here's another ochre that's gotten the exact same treatment, and hopefully you can see here why you might want to consider dry brushing your next pre-shading zenithal undercoat. That really take a look at the close look at the details, the hair, the face. You're just getting a lot more definition and detail, just a little more texture than you would be getting had you just blasted this with an airbrush, from the top. You would not have the sort of definition in some of the top-facing textures. The shoulder pad would be all white, the top of his head would be white, his beard would be differently shaded. To each their own, but I think that dry brushing really gives you a nice effect. I think they both have their places, but definitely consider using a dry brush for your next zenithal pre-shading. Once you've got this, it doesn't take that long to bring it up to this point. So here we've got Hrothgar, the model from this video, all painted up. Stay tuned for a detailed speed painting video of how to go from this to this in just a few relatively quick to follow steps. That video will be out later this week. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe. As always, ask any questions below. I'm happy to help you out with this stuff. And stay tuned for the follow-up video on going from blue to full color.